My stepmother called me at 2 in the morning screaming, "Sarah, your sister is in a crisis right now. Send $15,000 immediately to secure her spot in the finals or she loses everything." I stared at the phone, my eyes burning from a 36-hour trauma shift. They didn't ask if I was alive, they just demanded the money. I said calmly, "Call your perfect little princess." Then I hung up, turned off my phone, and went back to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Panic is a luxury I cannot afford in the operating room, and I certainly wasn't going to waste it on them. My pulse remained at a resting 60 beats per minute. In the trauma bay, you assess the damage, you stop the bleeding, and you stabilize the patient. In this case, the patient was my bank account, and the hemorrhage was coming from my own family. I sat on the edge of my bed and opened my banking app. Face ID recognized me instantly, granting access to the ledger of my life. I scrolled past my student loan payments, past the rent for this overpriced apartment near the hospital until I found it, the emergency family card. I had authorized that line of credit 3 years ago. It was supposed to be for life and death scenarios, a broken furnace in winter, a medical deductible, a blown transmission. My father had sworn hand over his heart that it would only be used when there were absolutely no other options. I had believed him because I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that my utility to them went beyond just currency. I tapped on the pending transactions. There it was, time-stamped 4 minutes ago. $15,000. The merchant name wasn't the Miss Magnolia Pageant Association or a registration portal. It was Leclerc Couture. A rush order for a custom evening gown. They weren't trying to save Alyssa's spot in the competition due to a clerical error. They were trying to buy her a better dress because the one she had wasn't winning. They lied to me at 2 in the morning, waking a surgeon who holds human hearts in her hands to steal money for silk and sequins. The rage I felt wasn't hot. It was absolute zero. It was the kind of cold clarity you get when you realize the diagnosis is terminal. I didn't call them back to argue. I didn't ask for an explanation. I simply tapped Manage Card, then Report Lost or Stolen. And finally, Close Account Permanently. The app asked if I was sure. It warned me that this action could not be undone and that any authorized users would be immediately cut off. I had never been more sure of anything in my life. I confirmed the action. The little loading circle spun for a second, and then the line of credit vanished from my dashboard. Declined. I put the phone down on the nightstand. My apartment was silent. It smelled faintly of antiseptic soap and old coffee. It was sterile, organized, and empty. Everything in this room, from the ergonomic mattress to the blackout curtains, was designed to maximize efficiency for a life dedicated to saving others. My walls were bare except for my diplomas. My closet was full of scrubs and practical coats for the Chicago winter. My family lived in a different world, a chaotic, loud, colorful world of pageants and applause where money was just a tool to maintain an illusion. For years, I had been the silent investor in their vanity project. I was the safety net they didn't respect, but always expected to catch them. They thought my love was a subscription service they could overdraft without consequence. But tonight, they had finally hit the limit. I looked at the dark screen of my phone. It lit up again, Christina calling. Then my father. Then a text from Alyssa. I didn't feel the urge to answer. I felt the cold satisfaction of a surgeon who had just successfully amputated a gangrenous limb. The bank of Sarah was closed, and this time there would be no reopening ceremony. To understand why cutting them off felt less like a tragedy and more like a necessary surgical procedure, you have to understand where I was 48 hours before that phone call. I was standing on a stage in a university auditorium, the lights blindingly bright, waiting for my name to be called. It was my white coat ceremony. For 8 years, I had ground my bones to dust for this moment. I had survived organic chemistry, the MCAT, sleepless nights in the library, and clinical rotations where I saw things no human should have to see. This ceremony wasn't just a formality. It was the finish line of a marathon run entirely uphill. I had reserved 4 VIP seats in the front section, row G, seats 4 through 7. I had bought the tickets months in advance. I had sent the itinerary. I had even offered to pay for their hotel. When the dean called my name, Dr. Sarah Miller, the applause was polite. My colleagues cheered. But when I looked down at row G, all I saw was empty red velvet. 4 vacant seats staring back at me like open wounds. They hadn't gotten lost. They hadn't had a flat tire. My father had texted me that morning, a breezy, casual message that I read while putting on my dress shoes. "So sorry, honey. Alyssa needs us. It's the preliminary round for Miss Magnolia. You know how nervous she gets. Send us a picture. They drove 8 hours in the opposite direction to watch my 22-year-old sister wave from the back of a convertible on a parade float. They chose a sash and a plastic tiara over the doctoral degree of their eldest daughter. For a long time, I tried to diagnose their behavior like a disease. I thought if I could just isolate the variable, if I was prettier, if I was less intense, if I made more money, I could cure their indifference. But standing on that stage, feeling the weight of the white coat settle on my shoulders, I finally understood the pathology. I realized I was caught in the classic dynamic of a narcissistic family structure. Alyssa is the golden child. She is the perfect, shiny projection of everything my stepmother Christina wishes she was. Alyssa is compliant, decorative, and exists solely to reflect glory back onto her parents. She is a doll they can dress up and parade around to validate their own status. I am the scapegoat. I represent the messy, uncomfortable reality they spend their lives trying to ignore. My work involves blood trauma and the fragility of life. It isn't pretty. You can't put a filter on a car crash victim. Christina hates me because I am a mirror that doesn't flatter her. I am a reminder that life is hard and serious, while she wants to live in a fantasy of eternal youth and beauty. They didn't miss my graduation because they were busy. They missed it because my success doesn't feed their ego. It threatens it. A trauma surgeon daughter is impressive on paper, but in person I am too real, too sharp, too substantial. I take up space they want to reserve for their fantasy life. That empty row wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A deliberate, calculated choice to starve me of validation, so I would stay hungry and compliant. But as I walked off that stage, I didn't feel hungry anymore. I felt full. I was full of the realization that I had spent my life auditing a class I had already failed, taught by people who were never qualified to grade me. They had made their choice to worship the image over the substance. And now, 48 hours later, as I sat in the silence of my apartment, I was finally making mine. I didn't have to wait long for their counterattack. In a normal family, a declined credit card during a crisis would trigger a phone call of confusion, maybe even a hesitant apology. In my family, it triggered a siege. My phone started vibrating against the nightstand, a relentless, angry buzz that echoed in the empty room. Text messages were piling up. Christina calling me selfish. My father asking how I could be so cruel to my sister. Alyssa sending a string of crying emojis followed by a demand to fix this immediately. I didn't unlock the screen. I just watched the notifications roll in like data points on a vitals monitor, confirming the patient was unstable. Then a different name popped up. Chloe. Chloe is my cousin on my father's side, the only person in that gene pool who didn't view life through a filter of hairspray and delusion. She was at the pageant in Georgia, sitting in the audience. Her text was short. I am so sorry you have to see this, but you need to know exactly what you're paying for. Watch the attachment. I tapped the video file. The footage was shaky, shot from a cell phone, zooming in on a large screen at the pageant venue. It was a live stream feed from the backstage dressing rooms meant to show the glamour and excitement behind the scenes. The audio was a cacophony of blow dryers and nervous laughter. The camera panned past a rack of sequined gowns and landed on Christina. She wasn't aware she was in the frame. She was holding a glass of champagne, leaning in close to speak to another mother, a woman wearing a judge badge. The background noise dipped just enough for the microphone on the nearby vanity table to pick up her voice with crystal clarity. "Oh, Sarah," Christina's voice dripped with a familiar sugary poison. "No, she couldn't make it. She's a doctor, you know. Trauma." She scrunched her nose, a theatrical grimace of disgust. "Honestly, it's so gross. She spends all day elbow deep in blood and guts. I tell her, honey, you will never find a husband smelling like antiseptic and death." The other woman laughed politely. Christina took a sip of her drink and smiled, a shark baring its teeth. "Thank God Alyssa is the pretty one. She's the face of this family. Sarah is just the wallet. Someone has to pay for the diamonds, right?" The video cut to black. I sat in the silence of my bedroom, the phone heavy in my hand. I waited for the hurt to come. I waited for the sting of rejection, the familiar ache of being reduced to a utility bill. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange, cold sense of relief. For years, I had wondered if I was imagining the malice. I had wondered if my sensitivity was the problem, if I was misinterpreting their neglect as cruelty. Gaslighting is a powerful drug. It makes you question your own reality. It was objective, irrefutable evidence. She had said it out loud. To a stranger. On camera. She didn't see me as a daughter. She didn't even see me as a human being worthy of respect. She saw me as a resource to be mined, a disgusting necessity that funded her fantasy life. The gross surgeon was only useful when the credit card bill arrived. I saved the video to 3 different cloud accounts. I wasn't just hoarding pain, I was gathering evidence. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was a transaction that had gone bad. They had breached the contract. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The city was a grid of lights, cold and logical. I liked it that way. In the ER, when a limb is necrotic, you don't try to save it with positive thinking. You cut it off to save the body. Christina had just handed me the scalpel. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I wasn't the wallet. I was the one holding the blade, and the surgery was just beginning. I wiped the tears from my face. They were the last free thing my family would ever get from me. I opened my contacts and scrolled past Dad and home to a number I hadn't dialed in months. Grandma Eleanor. Eleanor was the iron spine of our family tree. She was the one who built the family fortune from a single dry cleaning shop into a real estate empire. She was 82, sharp as a tack, and she had no patience for fools or thieves. But for years, Christina had been the gatekeeper feeding. Grandma filtered updates about how struggling the family was and how distant I had become. I pressed call. It rang twice. Sarah, her voice was raspier than I remembered but strong. "Is everything all right?" Christina told me you were too busy with your doctor things to come to the pageant. I wasn't too busy, Grandma. I wasn't invited. I kept my voice steady. "I'm sending you a video file right now. Please watch it. Alone." I waited on the line while the file transferred. The silence stretched heavy and thick. Then I heard the tiny, tinny sound of Christina's voice coming through the receiver, the laughter, the mockery, the word wallet. When the video ended, the silence that followed was terrifying. She said that Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper, vibrating with a cold fury I had never heard directed at anyone but tax auditors. She called my granddaughter a utility bill. "Yes," I said. "And Grandma, I need access to the old financial records. The college fund, Dad said, was lost in the market crash of 2008. I need to see the statements." "I'll authorize it," she said instantly. "Burn it down, Sarah. Burn it all down." 2 hours later, I was sitting in a conference room in downtown Chicago. On one side of me was Alexander, my fiancé. He didn't say much. He just kept his hand on my shoulder, a solid grounding weight. On the other side was a forensic accountant named David, a man who read spreadsheets like sheet music. We were looking at the history of the Family Education Trust. My father had told me for years that the market had swallowed it whole. He used that loss to guilt me into taking out loans, into paying for things I couldn't afford, into helping out because the family had suffered such a blow. As David pulled up the withdrawal history, I felt a familiar ache in my chest. It wasn't just about the money. It was the sunk cost fallacy. In economics, it's the irrational urge to keep investing in a losing project because you've already put so much into it. You think, if I just put in a little more, maybe it will turn around, maybe it will finally be worth it. I had treated my family like a bad investment for decades. I poured in love time, achievements, and money, thinking that eventually the graph would trend upward. I thought if I just became a surgeon, if I just paid for the emergency dress, if I just stayed quiet enough, I would finally get a return on my investment. I would finally get a mom and dad who loved me. But looking at the screen, seeing the dates and the dollar signs, I realized the market hadn't crashed. The market was rigged. There was never going to be a return. I was throwing gold into a black hole. And the only way to survive a black hole is to cut the anchor. You have to accept the loss. You have to look at the years of effort and say, that is gone, and it is never coming back. It is a terrifying kind of freedom, realizing you are bankrupt in the currency of their love, but realizing that also means you no longer have to pay the bill. "Sarah," David said, interrupting my thoughts. He adjusted his glasses, zooming in on a series of transactions from 10 years ago. "Your father said this fund was empty by the time you started college, right?" "Yes," I said. "It wasn't wiped out," David said, his voice flat. "It was drained. And not by the market." He turned the screen toward me. "You need to see where this money went." I leaned in. The anchor was cut. Now I was just looking at the wreckage. "This account," David said, pointing to the top of the spreadsheet. "Trust number 8492. It was established 22 years ago. The initial deposit was $200,000. I stared at the date. 22 years ago. I was 5. That was the year my biological mother Maria died of ovarian cancer. Your father told you this was a general family savings account, David asked, his voice careful like he was delivering a stage 4 diagnosis. Yes, I whispered. He said it was a mix of his savings and some investments. He lied, David said. This is an irrevocable trust. The grantor was Maria Miller. The sole beneficiary is Sarah Miller. Your father was listed as the trustee until you turned 25. The room seemed to tilt. This wasn't family money. This wasn't a pot of gold my father had earned and lost. This was my mother's life insurance. This was the last thing she did on this earth, ensure that her daughter wouldn't have to struggle. She had died so I could be safe. Show me the withdrawals, I said. My voice sounded mechanical, detached. I was entering the operating mode where emotions are shut down to perform the procedure. David scrolled down. It was an autopsy of a crime. The withdrawals didn't start immediately. For a few years, the money sat there growing interest. Then, 10 years ago, right around the time Alyssa started competing seriously, the bleeding began. June 12, 2014, David Reed. $4,500. Payee Smile Perfect Dental. Memo Veneers. I touched my own teeth with my tongue. I had worn braces for 3 years in high school, paid for by my first job at a diner. Alyssa had gotten custom veneers paid for by my dead mother. August 3, 2015, David continued. $12,000, Payee Star Maker Pageant Camp, October 2016, $8,000, custom wardrobe. The list went on and on. It was a catalog of vanity. While I was eating ramen and sewing up holes in my winter coat to survive med school, they were draining my mother's legacy to pay for spray tan's voice lessons and entry fees. Then came the biggest hit. July 2018, David said, pausing. $25,000. Payee Lux RV Rentals. Memo Miss Teen USA Tour. I remembered that summer. I was working double shifts at the hospital as a scribe, sleeping 4 hours a night trying to make rent. My father had told me they were scraping by to support Alyssa's dream. They weren't scraping by. They were taking a luxury vacation in a rented mansion on wheels, fueled by the money my mother meant for my tuition. The total, David said, closing the laptop, is $152,000. The account currently has a balance of $43.12. They hadn't just stolen money. Money is replaceable. They had stolen my mother's protection. They had stolen the last act of love a dying woman had for her child and turned it into hair extensions and plastic trophies for her replacement. It wasn't theft. It was grave robbery. I looked at Alexander. His face was white with rage, his hands clenched into fists on the table. But I didn't feel rage. I felt a cold, dark resolve. This was no longer a civil dispute. This was a moral atrocity. What are my options? I asked David. This is embezzlement, David said. Breach of fiduciary duty. Conversion of funds. Because the amount is over $100,000 and it involves a trust, this is a felony. You can sue for triple damages in civil court, but you can also go to the district attorney. Do it, I said. Draft the complaint. Sarah Alexander said softly. This will destroy them. Your father. He could go to prison. I looked at the spreadsheet one last time. I looked at the line item for pageant coaching. He didn't act like a father, I said. He acted like a parasite. And you don't negotiate with parasites. You exterminate them. I stood up. Get the papers ready. I have a feeling they're going to come looking for me when the credit card decline hits them. And when they do, I want to be ready to serve them. The Miss Magnolia finals were a disaster for Alyssa. Without the bribe money, she had to wear her old gown, a perfectly fine dress that she hated because it wasn't new. She placed third runner-up. She didn't win the crown, the scholarship, or the glory. But the real drama started when the credit card decline hit. My father tried to pay the hotel bill and the card was dead. Christina tried to buy a consolation dinner and the card was dead. They called me. I didn't answer. They texted me. I blocked them. Desperation makes people stupid. Instead of going home to Georgia, they drove north, 800 miles to Chicago. They assumed that if they just showed up, if they just screamed loud enough in my face, I would cave. They assumed I was still the little girl who would apologize for taking up space. They were wrong. I was in the main lobby of the hospital consulting with a family about a post-op recovery plan when I heard the commotion. I am her father. You can't stop me. I looked up. My father was shoving a security guard. Christina was behind him, looking frazzled and furious, still wearing her pageant mom Team Alyssa button. Alyssa was there too, sulking in sunglasses, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. My colleagues were staring. The security team was mobilizing. This was my workplace. This was the sanctuary where I saved lives, and they were treating it like a trailer park brawl. I excused myself from the patient's family. The distance between the intake desk and the sliding doors felt like a mile, but I crossed it with the authority of someone who commands a room when seconds matter. I was wearing my scrubs and my white coat. My ID badge clipped to my chest read Dr. Sarah Miller, Chief Surgical Resident. I didn't shrink. I didn't look down. Sarah Christina shrieked when she saw me. "What is wrong with you? You cut off the card. We're stranded. We can't even pay for gas to get home." "Lower your voice," I said. It wasn't a request. It was an order. "Don't you dare talk to your mother like that," my father spat, his face red. "You ungrateful little brat. You think because you have a fancy job you can just abandon your family? Fix this, now. Call the bank." "There is no misunderstanding," I said, my voice calm and projecting clearly across the lobby. "I closed the account. Because you stole $15,000. "We didn't steal it," Christina yelled. "It was an emergency." "Address is not an emergency," I said. "But that's not the only thing you stole, is it?" I pulled a manila envelope from my pocket. It contained the forensic report David had compiled, the spreadsheet of the trust fund, the list of withdrawals. "What is this?" my father asked, snatching it from my hand. "That," I said, "is a record of the $150,000 you stole from my mother's trust. The money she left for me. The money you spent on veneers and RV rentals." My father's face went from red to gray in 3 seconds. He looked at the papers, then at me. The bluster vanished. He looked small. "Sarah," he stammered. We were going to pay it back. It was a loan." "You stole from a ghost to dress a doll," I said. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. "You desecrated the memory of the woman who died to protect me, just so you could play pretend with her." "Please," Christina whispered, realizing the audience they had attracted. People were filming. Security was surrounding them. "Sarah, let's go somewhere private." "No," I said. "We're done with private. This is public record now." I signaled to the head of security, a man named Marcus, who had watched me stitch up gunshot wounds at 3 a.m. "These people are harassing me," I told Marcus. "They are trespassing, and I am serving them." I handed my father a second envelope. "This is a civil lawsuit for embezzlement and conversion of funds. And this is a temporary restraining order. If you come within 500 feet of me, my home, or this hospital again, you will be arrested." "You can't do this," Alyssa said, finally speaking up, her voice trembling. "We're your family." "I'm not your daughter anymore," I said, looking my father in the eye. "And I'm not your sister. I'm the plaintiff." I turned my back on them. "Sarah," my father shouted, a desperate, broken sound. I didn't stop. I walked back toward the elevators, back toward the trauma center, back toward the work that mattered. Behind me, I heard Marcus's deep voice. "Sir, you need to leave the premises immediately or you will be detained." I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the surgical floor. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of my family being escorted out by security. The silence in the elevator was beautiful. It sounded like justice. The legal system moves slower than trauma, but it is thorough. They settled. They had to. The alternative was a felony conviction and prison time for my father. To repay the $150,000 plus interest, legal fees, and damages, they had to sell the house. The big colonial with the manicured lawn, the stage set for their perfect life, was sold to a young couple who had no idea it was built on a foundation of theft. Christina tried to spin it as downsizing for retirement, but in a small town, gossip travels faster than fiber optics. Everyone knew. They moved into a 2-bedroom rental on the edge of town. There are no more galas. There are no more country club lunches. The social currency she valued more than her stepdaughter is gone. Alyssa learned the hardest lesson of all. The real world doesn't care about sashes. Without the bank of daddy to fund her lifestyle, she had to get a job. She works at a high-end boutique in Atlanta now. She folds clothes for women who live the life she thought she was entitled to. It is a quiet, mundane justice. She isn't suffering. She is just ordinary. And to a narcissist, being ordinary is a fate worse than death. I didn't go to the auction. I didn't stalk their social media to watch them pack. That is the mistake people make with revenge. They think they have to watch the house burn to feel warm, but standing too close to the fire just makes you smell like smoke. It is 6 months later. I am standing on the balcony of my new apartment. It is freezing in Chicago, but the heat lamps are on, casting a warm orange glow against the night. Alexander is inside laughing at something, Grandma Eleanor said. Grandma moved here last month. She said she wanted to be closer to the winner, as she calls me. She cut my father out of her will the day she saw the forensic report. She is sitting in my living room drinking tea, safe and respected. This is what I learned about vengeance. It isn't about their poverty, it is about my peace. It is about what I call quiet sovereignty. Sovereignty means you rule your own borders. It means you decide who enters and who is exiled. For years I lived in their kingdom, begging for scraps of affection, paying taxes in the form of dignity in dollars. Now I have built my own kingdom. My walls are thick, my gates are locked, and the best part is they cannot enter. Their guilt trips dissolve at the border. Their demands for money bounce off the firewall. They are simply ghosts haunting a life I no longer live. I look out at the city lights, the grid of Chicago, stretching out like a vast electric nervous system. I am tired, but it is a good tired. It is the exhaustion of building something real. Alexander comes out to the balcony and hands me a glass of wine. He doesn't ask what I'm thinking. He knows. He wraps his arm around me and we just stand there breathing in the cold, clean air. I am not the wallet. I am not the scapegoat. I am Sarah. And for the first time in 27 years, the silence isn't lonely. It is victorious. If you've ever had to build your own family to find peace, share this story. You are not alone.